Chapter 1. The soft light of dawn streamed through the curtains, painting the room in gentle hues of gold and blue. Emma Carter stirred awake, blinking sleepily as Jasmine, her golden retriever, rested her head on the side of the bed. The dog's tail thumped lightly against the floor in anticipation. At the foot of the bed, Louis stretched luxuriously, letting out a quiet meow as Emma shifted to sit up. The rhythm of the morning felt familiar, grounding, but beneath it was an unease she couldn't shake. She reached down, giving Jasmine a scratch behind the ears before swinging her legs over the edge of the bed. The faint clink of a coffee mug came from the kitchen. Ethan was already up, and the comforting smell of coffee wafted through the house. She smiled faintly. His quiet mornings were as consistent as the sunrise, a grounding presence that steadied her. Pulling on her robe, Emma padded down the hallway. Louis trailed after her, his soft paws silent on the wooden floor. In the kitchen, Ethan leaned against the counter, his Bible open beside him. He sipped his coffee, deep in thought, while Jasmine sat at his feet, her tail sweeping the floor eagerly. "Morning," Emma said, her voice still groggy. Ethan glanced up and smiled. "Morning, coffee's ready," he said, gesturing to the pot. He crouched to ruffle Jasmine's ears, then scratched Louis's chin as the cat hopped onto the counter. Emma poured herself a cup and joined him at the table. "What are you reading?" "Isaiah 41:10, he said, his tone thoughtful. "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." She took a sip of coffee, letting the verse sink in. "It's comforting," she admitted, but her thoughts were already drifting. She picked up her phone, scrolling through the morning's news. Her breath caught. "Massive earthquake levels coastal city," one headline read. "Record-breaking heat wave continues across Europe," declared another. "World leaders call for religious unity to address global crises." Ethan watched her expression shift. "What's wrong?" Emma set her phone down and sighed. "It's everywhere, Ethan. The signs, the warnings, everything we've been studying, it's all happening." He reached across the table, resting his hand on hers. "We've known this would come, Em. Stay focused. We're doing what we're called to do." She nodded, taking comfort in his calm certainty, but the weight in her chest didn't lift entirely. The drive to work brought Emma along tree-lined country roads, the sun rising higher as it painted the rolling hills in shades of gold. The stillness of the countryside clashed with the noise of the headlines that echoed in her mind. "It's like the world is falling apart," she thought, gripping the wheel tighter. Emma parked outside her office, taking a moment to breathe. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Don't forget about tonight's recording. Love you." She smiled, replying quickly before heading inside. Their YouTube channel, The Last Call Network, was a shared passion, a way to spread the urgency of God's message in a world increasingly distracted. But it wasn't without challenges. The comments on their videos ranged from heartfelt to hostile, and sometimes the weight of it all felt overwhelming. At the office, her coworkers greeted her warmly. Conversations circled around weekend plans and the latest TV shows, but no one mentioned the news. They don't want to think about it, she thought, frustration prickling at the edges of her calm. During a recent team meeting, she had tried to bring up hope and resilience, only to be met with polite indifference. On the other side of town, Ethan's day was already in full swing. The hum of machinery and the smell of freshly cut wood filled the air at the job site. As a contractor, he spent his days managing projects, but even here, the weight of the world wasn't far away. "So, Ethan," Mr. Radcliffe, the client, began as he gestured toward his phone, "what do you think of all this? Earthquakes, heat waves, world leaders talking about morality? Crazy times, huh?" Ethan set the blueprints aside, sensing an opening. "I don't think it's just coincidence," he said carefully. "A lot of what's happening lines up with prophecy in the Bible. It talks about natural disasters increasing and global movements toward unity before everything changes." Radcliffe raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" "Completely. It's not random. Things are being set in motion," Ethan replied. As Radcliffe shook his head, chuckling dismissively, Mark, one of the electricians, pretended to focus on his tools nearby, but his ears were clearly tuned to the conversation. Ethan caught his glance and softened his tone, speaking more for Mark now. "It's not about fear," Ethan added. "It's about being prepared spiritually. There's peace in knowing what's coming and trusting that God has a plan." Mark hesitated, then approached once Radcliffe walked off. "I've got to admit, some of what you've said, it's starting to make sense," he admitted quietly. "Yeah, I'm not there yet, but it's hard to ignore." Ethan nodded. "It's not about having all the answers right away. If you ever want to talk more, I'm here." Mark gave a small smile. "Thanks, I might just take you up on that." As Emma and Ethan's day unfolded in separate spaces, their thoughts remained tethered to the same truth: the urgency of their mission. On his way home, Ethan tuned into a radio segment. The host spoke about recent natural disasters and growing calls for a moral reset. One guest mentioned the need for shared values and a universal day of rest. Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "It's starting," he thought, the language unmistakably aligning with what they'd studied in prophecy. When he pulled into the driveway, Jasmine barked excitedly from the porch. Emma was just stepping out of her car, and she waved as he got out of the truck. "Hey," she greeted, walking toward him. "How was your day?" "Busy," he said, giving her a quick hug. "How about you?" She hesitated. "The usual. People at work don't really want to talk about anything serious. It's like they're oblivious." Ethan nodded. "We can't expect everyone to see it. We just need to keep planting seeds." That night, after dinner, they set up their recording equipment in the living room. Jasmine curled up near the couch, her soft snores a comforting background to the quiet hum of preparation. Louis perched on a shelf, his amber eyes fixed curiously on the activity below. Emma and Ethan knelt together, their hands clasped as they prayed for guidance, asking God to use their words to touch hearts and prepare others for what was coming. As the recording began, Emma poured her heart into explaining the urgency of the times, her voice steady yet impassioned. Ethan nodded as she spoke, interjecting with scripture and insight, their rhythm seamless. Every word carried a sense of purpose, a weight they both felt keenly. They weren't doing this for recognition. They were doing it because they believed it was what God had called them to do. When they finished, Emma scrolled through the comments on their previous video. Some brought tears to her eyes, stories of people renewing their faith or discovering truths they'd never understood before. But the harsh comments stung too. Accusations of fear-mongering, extremism, and ignorance. She sighed, setting the phone aside. "Do you ever feel like we're not ready for what's coming?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan moved to sit beside her, his presence steadying. "No one's ever fully ready," he said gently, "but that's why we trust him. He'll give us what we need when we need it." Emma nodded, leaning into him. His calm reassured her, but as she prepared for bed that night, the headlines from the morning replayed in her mind. The sense of unease lingered, a faint pulse beneath the quiet of their home. The recording equipment had been packed away, and Emma was reaching for the living room light switch when, without warning, the entire house plunged into darkness. "What happened?" she asked, her voice cutting through the sudden silence. Ethan grabbed his phone and flicked on the flashlight, its beam casting long shadows across the room. Jasmine whimpered, pressing against Emma's leg, while Louis leapt onto the couch, his tail flicking nervously as his eyes darted toward the window. "Probably just a power outage," Ethan said, though his tone betrayed a sliver of uncertainty. He moved toward the window and pulled back the curtain slightly. Outside, the night was eerily still, the trees motionless as if holding their breath. A strange light flickered in the distance, faint but persistent, casting an otherworldly glow against the horizon. "Do you hear that?" Emma whispered, her hand resting on Jasmine's back to calm the dog. Ethan froze, listening. At first, there was nothing but the faint rustle of leaves, but then it came, a low humming sound, faint but steady, like the hum of machinery or the distant murmur of an approaching storm. It sent a chill through the room, an unexplainable feeling of foreboding. Ethan turned back to Emma, his expression unreadable. "Stay here," he said quietly, his voice steady but firm. Jasmine growled low, her ears flat against her head. "Ethan," Emma started, her voice trembling, but he shook his head. "I'll check it out," he said, gripping the flashlight tightly. "Just stay with Jasmine and Louie. I'll be back in a minute." He moved toward the front door, his shadow stretching long across the floor as Emma stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. The hum grew louder, the sound pressing against her ears like an invisible weight. She clutched Jasmine's collar, whispering a silent prayer. As Ethan opened the door, the strange light intensified, flooding the porch with an unnatural glow. For a moment, Emma could see his silhouette framed against the eerie brightness. And then, without warning, the hum ceased. Silence fell. "Ethan," she called out, her voice shaking. He didn't respond. The door creaked open wider, the glow disappearing as quickly as it had come. And then, in the suffocating quiet, Emma heard it, a faint knock. Not from the door Ethan had opened, but from the back of the house.